Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, your resource for all things business, brand, and leadership. We are excited you have decided to join us today.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I am Robert Kaelin here with Mike Newman. Got a great program.
Great to be with you today.
Yep.
We've nearing into this second month of 2024 already. And one of the things that is always interesting to me is how quickly time goes by. And
I still am right in 2023, and we're in the second month. It's hard to shift our brains and our habits, right?
They say sometimes it takes 45 to 60 days to change a habit. So,
well, I believe it.
Yeah.
Well, that actually leads very nicely into what we were going to talk about today, which is changing culture. And we're proposing the question of, is it possible? So, Mike, do you want to give people kind of a little bit of a background on what you were thinking?
Yeah, so we talk oftentimes about our cultures in our organizations. In fact, there's a phrase out there from a few years back that culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And so you can have the greatest strategy moving forward, but if your culture is one that isn't accepting of the changes that you want to make, that strategy is going to go for naught. And I'll tell you this, the bigger the organization is, the harder it is to change the culture. And so I worked in a couple of really large organizations, and it was very, very hard. We talked about it at times about steering a ship, whereas if you're in a smaller organization, you're much more agile and you're more like a rowboat, and you can just take one oar out of the water and dig deep and get it to turn and move the direction that you want. And so today, as we talk about changing culture, it's part of the research that's been done around. It comes from a couple of guys named Roger Connors and Tom Smith. And they actually have a New York Times best-selling book from a number of years ago called Change the Culture, Change the Game. Breakthrough strategies to energize your organization and creating accountability for results. And so what they talk about is this model of a pyramid. And at the bottom of that model is what the foundation is: experience. And from experience, that's how we generate beliefs. And from our beliefs, then, that generates oftentimes the actions that we take, which then gives us the result. And so in this concept of what they talked about is it's possible to change culture when you start focusing on what's the new result that we want. And so, Robert, as you have had the opportunity to work in a big organization like Microsoft, and now running a couple of your own businesses, talk with us maybe a little bit about the differences in the size of the organization and the results that you were responsible for, and now the results that you have in smaller organizations that you have.
Yeah, that's great. So, prior to our conversation, I did a little bit of research. And in the vast majority of companies, this is according to a study, I'm getting this from Forbes, according to a study that they did, a vast majority of people or of companies that plan to shift culture, only 18% of their employees felt like they were change agile, like they could make the shift. And out of all of the businesses that do change or try to change, which shift their culture, 37% of those initiatives succeed. And what I go to think about, from my time at Microsoft, I can absolutely attest to what you're saying, Mike, of the larger the organization, the harder it is to be able to shift culture. And I think it's easy for me in my business right now because I have connection with my people. The further removed you are from the vision, every layer, you have to have buy-in. You have to have people that actually believe in the vision, that actually believe that the culture shift matters. for the end result. And so right now it's easy for me because I'm connected to every single employee that I have, and I can share and cast that vision and inspire those things to happen. But it's a lot harder at a large organization with, I think there's 125,000 people and a lot of different projects going on to say, hey, how does this actually connect, and what does it mean for me? I know we would have like all hands meetings, and the common language around it was like, oh, here we go again. Here's another one. I've heard this before. And so
if we just wait this out, we can go to doing what we were doing before. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And I actually had some great advice, in order to help me not adopt that mindset, which was, look, every time you go into one of these meetings, you can pull something from it. Find the one thing that you can pull from each of these meetings, which was helpful so that I didn't adopt that same fixed mindset going in.
When we talk about these things of the culture, sometimes there's words that trip us up. And so one of the words they have in that subtitle was creating accountability for results. That word accountability will oftentimes make people cringe. And what I love about their way of doing things and talking about it is they've got this process that they talk about. And it starts with looking at the top of this pyramid that they have, or this triangle that they have, of thinking about it in different ways. And so some of the questions that we've had in the past when we've done some work with this is what would happen if you're part of the organization, if every person you had was a go-to person? How do you define a go-to person? So we use some sports analogies because they're visible and easy to see. And in a basketball game, when the game's on the line, there is a person on that team that the play is designed for that go-to person. And we look at some of the greatest players of all time, like Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan. They would be the person who would take the shot. They were the go-to person. Now, if you read some things, or if you had a chance to maybe find some things out about Michael Jordan through some of the movies that have been out there, he was the go-to guy, but he will tell you that he missed a lot of those shots. And so it's important to know that just because you're a go-to person doesn't mean that you're going to get it right every single time. The second thing that I like to ask people when we're talking about it, what are the risks that people don't take, or they step back from opportunities for the fear that they might be the example of something that went wrong? They don't step up with their new idea or their great idea because the culture drags them back. And we maybe have heard these stories before about these, I don't know what you call it, experiments or sociological experiments, when they have monkeys and they do these types of things to look at behaviors. And what they did is they would have at the top of some rope or something, they had the bananas up there. And they let one monkey go up to the top. He got a banana and came down. The second monkey, they shot him with water and knocked him down. A third one, they did the same thing, shot him with water. The fourth one, they did the same thing. And so they saw this repeated thing of being, in this case, punished for failure. And so that changed the attitude of getting that. The fourth one came in, however the communication was that happened amongst them, he didn't even try to go up to get the bananas.
Wow.
And so there's some research done that way. And so I think about that oftentimes when people bring new ideas to us, and are we shooting down those ideas, or are we receptive? And we go back to some of our previous podcasts where we talked about environment. What's the environment that we're creating? And so when we want new results, that's the beginning of changing the culture.
Yeah.
And so if we were looking at an organization and they said, you know what, we're not really happy with the productivity level of our people in the field. Okay. Well, we're not happy with the results that we get. So instead of bringing them in and saying, how come you're not getting the results, or how come you're not doing this? It's looking at a different result. Instead of setting a goal that's a standard goal all the time, let's set some different goals on our numbers or whatever we create. And then we have to ask them to take some different actions.
Yeah.
And so when we take the different actions to produce that new result, what do those actions do? They may change the beliefs. And Robert and I've
That's
had
great.
these conversations in the past about, do you know how much a no is worth?
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to make a call and some of us get defeated when somebody tells us no. And I had a mentor one time ask me that question, do you know the value of a no? And so let me explain that to you just real quickly, listeners, so you kind of get what that kind of backwards language is all about, is that if it takes 15 no's for you to get a yes, and that yes, I'll change the math. If it takes 10 no's to get a yes, then every no and that yes equals $1,000 of a sale. So Robert and I are working on a conference right now, and we have tables that we're doing, and they cost $1,000. If it takes me 9 phone calls to get a yes, every one of those no's is actually worth $100.
Right.
Because on my 10th one, I get the yes, where I get to ring the till and say, yep, there's $1,000 that we did and sold the table. So knowing how many no's it takes for you to get a yes then becomes a different way that you're looking at the results. And so as we talk about changing the culture and we think about how we do this, clearly stating the new result, here's what I want. And then being okay with failure along the way to get to that, because failure is going to help you learn how to do it. And then what that does then is change the belief. And so some of you that are listening go, well, now I understand. Because I was pretty fired up when I found out that every no is actually worth something, versus going, oh, okay, that was 10 no's today. I guess I'll just forget about it for the rest of the day. So how does that, when we talk about that change in the new result and taking the action to produce it, Robert, how does that fit with some of the things that you've been working with?
That's great. Well, I have actually been reading a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. And it's written by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. And in it, they kind of propose this idea that to go 10X is easier than to just double. So let's say, your goal is, well, we've got one facility right now. Let's pretend you're a McDonald's. We've got one and we want to make 2. And what he argues in this is, look, if you have 1, make 10 more, because it'll actually be easier for you. And the reason being is there's probably 100 pathways to make another one, right? You can come up with a lot of concepts on how you can make 1 more, but there's only a few pathways to make 10. And so if you focus on doing the right things to get the result that you want to have down the road, it brings a lot of clarity to that. And then it makes buy-in a lot easier. And so, when I think about what you were talking about, Mike, there with, kind of really creating a shared vision, a new shared vision. And we've talked about this in previous episodes about inspiring a shared vision. It's really important to have clear communication on how it's really filtering down your organization. Like, who do you need to talk to that has influence with other people and share their part of this, how this benefits their organization and their people, right? Because if you don't have buy-in with it, it's really hard to push anything forward. I had a friend of mine tell me this funny illustration about a plant that was on the stage at their church. And they knew that if they just took it off the stage, that people would kind of freak out about it and be like, oh, the plant is gone. Yet what they did is they moved it 2 inches every single Sunday until it was in the corner of the room for a month. And then they got rid of the plant. And as soon as somebody complained, hey, the plant is gone, they were like, well, it's literally been sitting in the corner for a month, and so it's okay. We can live without the plant. Nobody else, it's not going to change anybody's world. Sometimes making those little shifts over time is good as well.
Yeah. So what you're doing is really talking about in this model that they have is the first step is clearly state the new result. We don't want the plant anymore. Okay.
Yep.
But we know there's consequences. We have discernment in this that I need to move that slowly out of the picture so that the repercussions aren't there. So what are you doing? You're taking action that's going to produce that new result. Okay. And then it moves to the third step of identifying the beliefs that generate the right actions.
Mm.
So your example leads right into, exactly what this model of change is about and changing culture. Even though the plant isn't necessarily the culture, it is part of it because culture is what we hear in the halls, what we see on the walls, and how people behave. And so a
Yep.
plant is something we see. And so the third step is identifying the right beliefs that generate the right actions. So as that example you were talking about, they believed that plant needed to be gone, but they knew if we moved it too fast, we would get an uproar. And so that's the balance of leadership. And it's a simple example, but a real practical example. And then you've got to provide experience, which is the fourth step that changes things to instill the right beliefs. We don't need this plan on the stage is the belief that wanted to be changed,
Yep.
but to take it immediately away would have caused and created a backlash. So whoever was the person that came up with that may or may not have read Change the Culture, Change the Game, but it is exactly how that model works. So every day we're providing experiences for people. And as leaders, what we have to do is think about if we're going to change the culture, how do we do that? How do we create those experiences? Whether you're moving a plant one step at a time, or you're changing seats inside the organization, you're moving somebody. I was working yesterday with a company, and they have some upheaval that's happened because a key person has decided to move on. Okay. And how do you replace that? And so my conversation with him is what were the things that went really well that you really liked, and what were the things that you didn't like that person was doing that you need to instill as change in the new person. And that begins to shift the culture, and so having identified it of what that new result is that you want, and then taking the steps of action that are going to do that. And it can't just be what I love about your illustration of the plant is exactly what it has to be. It has to be done consistently over time.
Yeah.
That's the way you make it happen.
Yeah. And that's so true. And I think about, we had several reorganizations while I was at Microsoft, and every single time it was the same thing, right? Like, okay, here we go again. Now, here's the next iteration of what we're going to look like. And the next leader is going to have all their own things. Well, the last reorganization that I had while I was there, they did a beautiful job. I mean, this new person came in and they were on a mission really to discover, like, how are you guys? Because you guys have moved around a lot. You've kind of been the forgotten stepchild, so to speak. And now we're moving back into the bigger piece of the organization rather than being lost and forgotten. And they did a really good job of discovery. And what that told me was that this person cared. Right. And that was the first step to make the change. Like, oh, this person cares about me and cares about this organization rather than just letting it be, a forgotten thing. And so I think that in shifting culture, not just having that vision, but really the why behind that vision, that, hey, we are better together. We can do this. You do matter. You're a big piece of this organization.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap this up today, Robert, I think there's, a few things that we should remember when we're changing culture. Number one, it's difficult. Okay. It's difficult, and you've got to have the willingness to do the battle. whether it's moving a plant 2 inches a week, or whether it's something more critical like what you're just talking about. And there needs to be a change in direction that is significant.
Hmm.
Okay, that you're doing something significant. It's not just change for the sake of change because I'm
Yeah.
there. The third
Yep.
one is what does it take to really deploy that change? Sometimes we don't think about the impacts. And I think as your illustration, Robert, was, this happened many, many times. And finally, the last time it was actually successful. And
Mhm.
I believe that's because people don't understand how long it takes to do a large scale deployment of change.
Yeah.
And then the last area I think that's really, really key in that is what are we doing to develop the people along the way? I would believe that what happened at Microsoft was that whoever that leader was doing a lot of development of the leaders that sat underneath them before it came out to the general population of people employed there. Because it is a strategic thing. You have to
Yeah.
think strategically about any changes that you want to make in culture.
That's good. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said. And, I know for me, being an action driven person, and I want to see things happen, and I want to see them happen fast, and I want to see it now. It's really hard. It is. And we need to be willing to be able to do hard things, but also even if you are the leader of the organization, you're driving things forward, but don't do it alone. Bring your team with you.
Mm-hmm.
Bring your team with you. So that would be my final thought.
All right. Well, Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Elevate podcast. Like,
right.
subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Take care. God bless.
Thank you for joining us. Our hope is this episode has been helpful for you today. If it's impacted you in some way, we encourage you to share it with someone. To receive a direct notification of our next episode, click the follow button on your favorite app or platform. You can also watch each episode on YouTube. The links are in the description. If you want to connect with us on a deeper level, go to countercultureleadership.com/resources. We'll see you next week on the Elevate podcast.